All right, guys, so I'm just going to continue going through the booklet here. On this portion of the booklet, obviously, we have, we're going to be talking about treaties, the numbered treaties in particular, okay? I know I don't, like in my version, obviously the videos or the pictures are very black. I'm going to try and give you some idea of what you're supposed to be looking at. And maybe in another video, I will actually put together like a slideshow of pictures, or I'll find a video and link it up to you. Anyways, when the government of Canada sent Canadians west, that means like west of Ontario, Toronto, they weren't aware that there were people living there. Okay, I'm sure they had an idea, but obviously they didn't realize that how many people. Like the western part of the country is heavily populated, right, with Indigenous peoples, and in the north you have Inuit. Obviously, I don't know why they would think that just there's a magical line right here and people would stop living over here, but that's what they're telling you. In order to give the land to the settlers moving west, the government had made deals with the First Nations to buy and take these lands. So this is around 1869. So Canada's already a country. So I mean, this is part of our history. Not a good part, but it's part of it. So, like I said in the first video, a treaty is a formal agreement between two groups. You guys make treaties all the time, or deals, right? If you want to look at it as a deal or agreement. First Nations gave up massive amounts of land for mining tools and farming supplies. By massive amounts of land, they mean the entire country, essentially. Obviously, treaties don't actually cover the entire country. British Columbia is generally left out of the treaties, but like very large swaths of land are covered by these treaties, an incredible amount of land. Now, they were given money. The money, a few bucks a person. Tools and farming supplies, that's a joke. The tools they gave the Indigenous peoples were terrible tools. Farming supplies, if they came, they were late, or they were after the farming season was over, or they were crappy tools. The Canadian government gave all the good farming supplies to the European settlers to encourage European settlers to come over. They didn't give the Indigenous peoples any extra stuff to help them with their farming. So keep that in mind. And yeah, they're legally talking about these still. Like, there are issues with these treaties. Obviously, we talked about how they're unfair. We're going to talk about that. So, who do you think won the negotiation between the First Nations and the government of Canada? Now, think about this. First Nations people, what did they receive? They received reserves, reserve land, which was a small chunk of land that they already had. So really, their land was shrunken. They didn't really receive reserves. They were just kind of like, here, you can have this small piece of land. That's yours now. Now, on those reserves, do you think they gave them good reserve land? Good farming land? No, most of the reserve land that they gave Indigenous peoples was swamp and other stuff that was very hard to farm on. The Indigenous peoples received small amounts of money. They received farming tools, those supplies. Is that enough to give up your way of life, your nomadic way of life, your hunting and fishing, following the bison, living off the land, living a traditional lifestyle? Is that enough? Is a reserve and some money enough to make that a good deal for the First Nations people? Or did the government of Canada win that negotiation? Why do you think the First Nations signed these treaties? So you got to put yourselves in their shoes. It is 1869. And your people have been suffering for years and years. Some peoples have been suffering for over 100 years, where they've been taken away from their land, oppressed, all that. You're in a tough spot. You don't want to keep people dying. You want to make sure you can save as many as your people as possible and save whatever you can of your peoples, right? I think you got to put yourselves in their shoes and give me a good answer there. Think empathy, right, guys? Put yourselves in their shoes. It's a really hard position. If you were the chief of an Indigenous peoples and your people were dying and starving, like you'd find a way. Would the government give the land back to the First Nations? Or should? I think that's a should. Well, that's a personal opinion. Should the government give the land back to the opinions or First Nations? Think about it. Give me a thoughtful answer. 2 sentences would be great. Use proper punctuation, all that jazz. And the next video, we'll go into this.